I'm going to record this one mainly because there's been some updates since yesterday. So for the online students who haven't seen the lecture, we'll post a new one this morning and get them a different show that may be just a little bit more updated. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Now, listen, we had a really good early turn in. Not as good as I would have hoped. I would have hoped for closer to 70, but we got 48 that got it in on time. I'll count a couple that came in just after midnight. One came in 9 minutes after midnight. Several came in at literally 11:59. But it was really great. And I've graded now just over half of those 48 because I had a bunch turned in even earlier. And I was able to get an early start and get a dozen or so graded. Read one this morning that was just absolutely stunningly well written. Writing is your strength as a school. People always talk about your math and your science, but I really think it's writing where UCAS just excels. So this semester plays to your strength. Write a great research paper, get all your study guides in, and the grades will be abnormally high. So that's really important. And we're not having a final. So just remember that. I keep getting email. When's the final? No final. First of all, I don't think you should be in that school any longer than you need to be, but also too, for public health reasons, but also too, I don't want to see a test. There's students that know everything, but don't take tests well. And so if we don't practice tests through the semester, then they end up getting an A- when they normally would have gotten an A. And I'm not going to allow anybody's grade to drop this semester simply because they're not a good test taker. So where they know the answers, but they freeze in a test and don't do well. I'm not going to let that happen. It's just not going to be. So you're going to be graded on your study guides and this paper. And people are knocking it out of the ballpark. Now, raise your hand if you turned it in early. Okay, well done, y'all. And that was great. And I'm turning those around as fast as I can. I can read about 5 a day. It takes about a half hour per paper. So I'll have them all to you, back to you, your scores by Sunday night. And I will update all of the scores in the roll book, including the last study guide, which I'll give to you Monday night. So next week, we'll have one more lecture, and then we'll have a study day, Wednesday, for everybody to get caught up. Now, if you're totally caught up, right, then you can focus on the other classes, your finals for the next week, which I would hope you do. So use the time wisely. But here's the deal too. If you get your paper in and all the work's done and you've got 100% right now, I'm going to put in a 0 for that last study guide on before I even assign it, so that you'll know exactly where your grade is if you do or don't do that last study guide. And there's many of you that don't need to do the last study guide because you'll have 97%, 98%, and you won't need to even bother with that last one. So this is kind of a reward for hard work throughout the semester. There's many others that are going to be doing makeup work right to the end, right? So that's the way it rolls. But those that didn't procrastinate, did all their work, made sure they got the answers correct in the study guide, yeah, you may be in for a nice treat on Monday. Let's see how that score rolls. I won't know exactly either until Monday, and I get all those zeros in there, and you'll look at it. Okay, so that should be some good news for some people who've worked very hard this semester. So the paper is the thing that matters most. If you don't do the paper, highest grade you can get with all the study guides turned in is a C. You just have to do the paper. Okay, so for those who haven't done it, get on it. All right, now, so let's also do just the normal stuff that we do before we get into the serious things. And that is, as we look at this election, the lead just keeps expanding for Biden as the big urban states certify and submit their final votes. It's almost 81 million. Mr. Trump's just barely got over 74. His percentage is now down to 46.9, and 81 million is what it looks like it's going to be. We're closing in on a 7 million vote win. This is just astonishing. The story of Joe Biden's victory over Donald Trump will be told for 100 years. This is one of the most remarkable victories in presidential history. Following Trump's amazing victory 4 years ago, an amazing rebuke frankly, of a president. And 49 days from now, we will have new leadership, and we can put this, can only be described as a collapsing presidency, a failed 4 years, essentially, in the rearview mirror. And we need new leadership. The thing is, while we're going through tremendous difficulties with the coronavirus and the economy, the president is still just simply talking about his fanciful, in his own mind, that he won this election. Even when Bill Barr, now his attorney general, said that, he didn't win. And also we get the vice president of the United States swearing in a new senator from Arizona. The thing is, when you certify the Arizona results, all the candidates are certified, even to the House and Senate seats and so on. So we just swore in a new senator to replace John McCain. Kelly is an astronaut who took that seat. He got sworn in yesterday by the vice president. If the results aren't accurate, if there's been fraud in Arizona, Pence is not going to swear in a new senator. It's just a house of cards that's collapsing, and it's pathetically sad. And it's just like, we've got to get through the next 49 days on our own, because our president has just basically decided to take the rest of this war off. So here's how it goes right here.
All right, John, thanks very much. Some late developments on the election. Today, Attorney General Bill Barr said the Justice Department has found no evidence of widespread fraud, contradicting President Trump. Here's Hallie Jackson.
That's Attorney General Bill Barr walking into the White House today, not long after telling the AP the Justice Department has not seen fraud on a scale that could have changed the outcome of the presidential race. With that, Barr is blowing a big hole in the baseless case the president's trying to make to undermine the election, especially significant since Barr is one of the most loyal cabinet members. He's also batting down a convoluted conspiracy once floated by Team Trump about election software switching votes, saying DHS and DOJ have looked into that, and so far, we haven't seen anything to substantiate it. Still, the president's campaign attorneys are clinging to their claims, with Rudy Giuliani responding with the greatest respect to the attorney general. His opinion appears to be without any knowledge or investigation of evidence of systemic fraud. Barr says there's none so far, as some in the president's base turn on the AG already. It's not only the administration's own Justice Department, but state leaders in the president's own party acknowledging the system worked, as President Trump now picks fights with GOP governors in states he lost. In Arizona, a tweet storm from Governor Doug Ducey defends the certification of Joe Biden as the winner there, after the president accused Ducey of rushing to put a Democrat in office. And President Trump's keeping up his attacks on Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, saying he allowed his state to be scammed. A top Republican there, fed up with escalating rhetoric, including death threats against elections officials.
This has to stop. We need you to step up. And if you're going to take a position of leadership, show some.
And that's a fellow Republican talking. And it's just sad beyond belief. I mean, it's a personal human tragedy when you realize somebody is that out of touch with reality. And it's just the way it is. And this is not the important thing. The election is over. It's done. Biden becomes president in 49 days. Thank goodness. And he's picking a great cabinet, including the first woman ever to head the Treasury Department. Let's go ahead and play a little bit of that right now.
Hallie Jackson, NBC News, the White House.
This is Peter Alexander in Wilmington, Delaware, where President-elect Joe Biden, nursing a fractured foot and a shattered economy, tonight formally introduced his team to lead the nation's recovery.
Our message to everybody struggling right now is this: help is on the way.
Biden offering an ambitious vision, raising taxes on the wealthy to pay for spending on healthcare, education, and infrastructure.
So basically what he's going to do is erase the Trump tax cut to the wealthy and put that into schools, healthcare, paying for the vaccine for everybody that needs it, and just trying to restore the economy, which is really his only option. And thankfully, he's got somebody that's very experienced who ran the Federal Reserve Bank, the national bank, for years, Janet Yellen, who's now going to be the Secretary of Treasury, who has this responsibility. First woman ever since Alexander Hamilton held this position.
We can build a new American economy that works for all Americans, not just some, all.
Poised to become the first woman to serve as Treasury Secretary, former Fed Chair Janet Yellen.
We will be an institution that wakes up every morning thinking about you, your jobs, your paychecks, your struggles.
Biden's.
Now, also too, it looks like a bipartisan group of senators finally got together and said, look, let's get some relief out to people who've lost their jobs and whatever. And that may actually pass. And again, we're doing this in the complete absence of a president who's actually serving. So he's out playing golf. I mean, it's beyond anything anybody could ever imagine. But this isn't the important story. The important story is our health. Yesterday, we lost as many people in one day as we lost on 9/11. This thing is real. It didn't go away in the fall as was promised. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. Now, listen to me very carefully. There is light at the end of the tunnel. The vaccine, there's dozens of them. 6 that are looking to be approved here in the United States. England is already vaccinating starting next week. They've already approved the BioNTech German company that works with Pfizer, and they're going to start vaccinating next week. They're a couple weeks ahead of us. Most countries in Europe are. We're way behind the 8 ball here. Most of these vaccines are made in Europe or Asia. China's going to be the number 1 country to make these vaccines. We're behind the curve, but with good leadership, we can catch up. But this light at the end of the tunnel is amazing, and we actually may be able to have a regular school year next fall. Let's hope. Okay, but before that, we have to face the grim reality, and here it is.
Good evening. It was just 2 weeks ago tonight. We opened this broadcast with news the number of COVID deaths in this country had surpassed 250,000. Well, sadly, 23,000 more have died since then. And tonight, as we come on the air, the situation has only become more critical. COVID cases are growing. Hospital space is not. The White House Coronavirus Task Force issuing an exceptionally blunt warning to states today and telling some Americans to restrict their movements outside their homes. Miguel Almaguer has late details.
Citing the current crisis unfolding at hospitals, testing sites, and morgues, the White House Coronavirus Task Force is now warning state leaders our nation is in a very dangerous place.
Most difficult time in the public health history of this nation. Before we see February, we could be close to 450,000 Americans that died from this virus.
Unveiling this new hotspot map, draping the U.S. in deep red, in a bold move, authorities warn if you are over 65 or have significant health conditions, you should not enter any indoor public spaces where anyone is unmasked. You should have groceries and medications delivered.
Attention, please.
It comes as hospitals nationwide are overwhelmed and increasingly understaffed with both COVID and non-COVID patients.
What was our initial rhythm?
NBC News given rare access inside DePaul Hospital in Missouri, where nearly every ICU bed is taken.
Unfortunately, once they get to us, we're not seeing a lot that make it out of here.
With more than 100 Americans diagnosed with COVID every minute, doctors say Thanksgiving travelers should assume they're infected. Today at LAX, NBC News given exclusive access inside the airport's new rapid testing laboratory before it opens next week.
With LA County shattering COVID records, passengers simply walk up to the test site. After they're swabbed, the samples are immediately processed in this lab. Results can come back prior to takeoff and perhaps before exposing other passengers.
But ahead of Christmas, doctors are pleading with Americans to avoid travel, warning today's crisis may be just a glimpse of what's to come. Miguel Almaguer, NBC News.
Let me bring in Dr. John Torres now. Dr. John, the CDC made a pretty important change, shortening their guidance on how long people have to quarantine. What do we know?
Because what he talks about is that if you can get tested, after 7 days, if you don't show symptoms, that you can have a quarantine shorter, but you have to test at the front and the back end of that. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump ahead a little bit And let's look at the vaccine story, which is really the miracle story. One of the greatest accomplishments in medical technology history.
By next week, people in the United Kingdom will become the first in the Western world to roll up their sleeves for mass inoculations against COVID-19. Richard Engel reports from London.
The potential turning point millions have been waiting for. With approval this morning, people in the UK can start getting the Pfizer vaccine early next week. The first Western country to move from the trial phase to vaccinating the public.
We've been waiting and hoping for the day when the searchlights of science would pick out our invisible enemy and give us the power to stop that enemy.
Distribution is a challenge. The Pfizer vaccine requires a 2-dose course, 21 days between shots, and it has to be stored at ultra-cold temperatures. So the rollout will begin in hospitals with cold storage, prioritizing the over 80s. Next, the elderly in care homes, and after it will go out in batches, descending by age group. The military will assist. Football stadiums, conference centers, and town halls are expected to become vaccination centers. By January, even local pharmacies here will be able to give the shots. This is the biggest and by far the most complex vaccination program in British history. The Pfizer vaccine was developed with the European company BioNTech. I spoke to its inventor, Uyur Shahin.
This is an extremely important milestone, and we are happy, relieved, and grateful that we achieved this milestone.
How do you think history will remember what we are embarking on now?
It's indeed the beginning of the end of the pandemic.
Words we've longed to hear, now finally backed by action to make them so. Richard Engel, NBC News, London.
Of course, BioNTech is a German company, and they coordinate with Pfizer. All these companies are international corporations. Most of the vaccines are going to be made in Europe. I think this one's actually being made in the Netherlands. And of course, we know Moderna's is being made in Switzerland, but China will be the #1 country to make vaccines. And they already have their own vaccines as well that are getting ready to vaccinate their population. And in other words, China's way ahead of us, Asia's way ahead of us, Europe's way ahead of us. We got catching up to do. And hopefully we can with new leadership. This one's kind of an important one. And I'm showing it to you because really China is the technology leader right now in almost every way. And they have a company there that's much bigger than Amazon that is getting ready to ship the vaccine to the world. And China's making their vaccine available. Remember, they did the genome sequencing and all that beforehand, and that's gave everybody a head start on the vaccines. So here we go. This is kind of an important little clip.
You're looking at one of the cargo jets that will soon be taking vaccines that are approved here in China, made by Chinese biotech companies, to the rest of the world. This one is a charter, Ethiopian Cargo. It's their pharma wing. Look over here. You can see they're already loading up some of the PPE, some of the face masks, some of the hazmat-like suits. Inside, however, they have built an infrastructure that is temperature and climate controlled. Why does that matter? Well, as soon as the vaccines are approved, they have to be kept at a certain temperature setting. And that is the only way they can be transferred from start here in Shenzhen in southern China to finish. For this aircraft, it continues on to the Middle East. One thing that's important to note is the logo on the side, China. That is a part of Alibaba. It's their logistics and distribution part. Normally, they're doing goods that people are buying online. Think of Amazon, but on a massive scale.
Okay, so Alibaba is Amazon, only much, much bigger. I mean, it's quantum leap beyond Amazon, as big as Amazon is. And they're just fitting these planes, getting everything ready. And this is for Ethiopia. Ethiopia's a poor country. They can't do this on their own. So China's helping them out. A role we used to play in the world, which we haven't for the last 4 years. And we've got to get back into the world and start working with our partners around the world on these things, because these things know no boundaries. The United States can't isolate itself or even take care of itself or even do its own manufacturing of vaccines at this point. England's system is one of the best healthcare systems in the world, they're going to be able to distribute that vaccine so much faster than we are, because we've got 50 states and every state has different allocations and different things. We got 50 systems. In England, they have one, and it just works like a charm. So at any rate, let's look at what China's doing too.
That is the company that here in China is helping with the distribution of vaccines as soon as they're given the go-ahead.
We are ready to move the vaccines.
Sino's CEO Wang Lin says the company is now adding more routes for greater global reach.
We are not still quite sure about the exact demand on that, but we're...
Okay, now Wen Chao, he is the head of Alibaba, and one of the most important tech leaders in the world. And it basically makes Jeff Bezos' operation of Amazon look small. And that's the kind of logistical technology that we need to get all the vaccines and everything to every little piece of the world that needs it. So there's a really important light at the end of the tunnel. And it's not just creating a vaccine, it's manufacturing a vaccine purely, keeping it pure and in the right temperatures. It's then shipping it. It's getting it to providers, getting it to hospitals, getting it to clinics, and getting those shots in people's arms and convincing people that it is safe. Now, there are some side effects. When you get this vaccine, you might have a couple of days where you're not feeling so good. I had that with my last shot. I got the double dose. You know, I'm 66, so I'm in that age group. And trust me, I was out for 3 days, basically, as the vaccine kicks in and teaches the body how to fight the viruses. So it's, you know, it's going to be a process, and people have to decide whether they feel, as a family, you'll need to sit down and decide, is this something that you want to try or not on the vaccines? And getting people to take it is another issue that has to be looked at, because we need 65% of the world, that's 6.5 billion people, that need to be vaccinated or have contracted the virus already to get to herd immunity. So it's a difficult road ahead. This is one of the most significant moments in world history. Certainly in American history, it's unprecedented in 100 years. And we should just be grateful of one thing. I was teaching my world history class, and we talked about plagues in the past. We talked about Justinian's plague, one that wiped out half of the Eastern Roman Empire. It was a terrible thing. In fact, the descriptions of it, John of Ephesus stated that people died at the rate of 5,000 to 16,000 a day in Constantinople alone. And they just simply quit counting the corpses at 230,000 because they took them outside the Theodosian walls and buried them outside the city. You know, it was a horrible thing. And then you look at the bubonic plague. This is the one that hit in the 1300s, 14th century. And it came like all of these things do. They know no boundaries, no borders. There's no one country that can be America alone, America first, do it ourselves. You can't. You got to work with the world on these things. And this is not going to be the only pandemic you're going to see. You're going to see several during your lifetime. The question is, will we learn from this terrible experience and be better next time? And in this case, we had probably on the Silk Route, this bubonic plague came on rats and mice and things, and there's things that live on them that transported it. And as a result, it hit Constantinople once again, you know, at the same place that got Justinian's plague. And that on the ships that sailed through the Mediterranean, it started to show up in Italy and France. Now, one city-state, Venice, made its whole economy on trade and ships. They came up with a plan to try to prevent it from hitting them, and it was called quarantine. They invented quarantine. They said, look, if your ship's coming in, you need to spend 3 months out there at sea to make sure that nobody on that boat has it, or if they have had it, it goes through its whole sequence and you're safe to come ashore. But it didn't work, of course, because the truth is they wouldn't have understood social distancing. They wouldn't have understood wearing masks. They wouldn't have understood, you know, how we have to deal with all this stuff. They didn't have anybody who could sequence a genome or could work on a vaccine. This is just something that would take half the population of Europe in some places. And it went to the green area in a year, yellow area the next year. Of course, transportation was slower then, but it still transmitted through the population. in London, just outside of London, where my wife grew up, there's a big hilltop field that's just gorgeous. It's next to Greenwich. It's a beautiful place. And there's no trees or anything on it. It's just this grassy field. It's called Blackheath. And when you find out why, this is where they buried all of the people in the bubonic plague that died in London during that time period. So it's basically a cemetery. So that's why they don't build on it or, you know, anything like that. We don't want to get to this. I mean, so we have to work with the world and we have to work together. And so we need to build back better. And we're going to have new leadership, and at a time when we desperately need it. Right now, it's up to the states to do what they can do. It's up to us as individuals to remember that wearing that mask matters. It may not affect you, but it may affect somebody you know and love, or somebody else's family. And that gets us to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, when he talked about the social contract theory. Now, basically, here's the deal. Jean-Jacques Rousseau would popularize this social contract of the general will. And what it basically means is that we have got to quit, and this is, remember, Europe in the 1700s, so in the 18th century, quit worrying about the rule of a king and divine right of kings, and start worrying about rule by the consent of the governed. I think I've got it right here. Political authority must be derived by the consent of the governed. And that's really what we saw in this last election. The governed said enough to the ineffective leadership that we've seen, especially this last year, that we're seeing at the moment, and said, we got to go with someone else. And I can't tell you how many of my neighbors, Republicans, whatever, voted for Biden and then went back and voted for the Republicans on the rest of the ticket. Look, the deal is that we need a leader right now. And the person we picked, Joe Biden, is probably the most experienced person to ever assume the presidency. He was vice president for 8 years, was in the Senate for over 30, foreign relations committees, everything else he did on all the judicial committees. There's nobody that knows Washington better, and there's nobody more prepared, perhaps, than this 78-year-old man who will, like in ancient history, like Cincinnatus for Rome, has a chance to be a great president because he's facing the biggest challenges that anybody's faced since 1932. And so we hopefully can build back better. And that's what he talks about now, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, is rule by the consent of the governed. And how do you get there intellectually? Well, he wrote a thing called the Discourse on Inequality, 1754, where he talks about political and ethical inequality. He said, ye are undone if ye once forget that the fruits of the earth belong to us all and the earth itself to nobody. How could these noblemen have these huge tracts of land? And the peasants and serfs had to just serve them and work for them, whatever. This was the medieval period. How could you have 4.5 million slaves in just the United States of America, the United States being the largest slave-owning country in the world, right? He adds this other comment right here. It says, men are born free, yet everywhere they are in chains. And that's exactly what was happening. But he says, we don't have to be like that. We can follow a new social contract theory. We don't have to believe in the divine right of kings. We can instead exercise what makes us truly human. See, he disagreed with Bacon and with Descartes, and he disagreed with Hobbes and all these others. Man in the state of nature was basically good and had three positive attributes. Number one was the right to choose. Number two was compassion. And the other was perfectibility. Now let's listen to this really fast. It's our right to choose. And if we have compassion for others, we will choose to wear a mask. That's what makes us different than the animals. For example, wolves can only do one thing, and that is feed their hunger. They have to act on instinct. We can choose, and we can get better. Notice what happens in our American Constitution. It says, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, they knew the Constitution wasn't perfect. They knew it had flaws. That's why they provided a way to change it, to amend it, to make it better. As we go through the long arc of history, let's just hope the last 4 years was just a bump in the road and that our arc continues forward and we get better. And that's really what it's all about, the general will of the people. And it's manifested through the vote. And so this whole idea of a new social contract, we are revoking the contract to the current president, We are giving a contract to a new one. And in 4 years, we will evaluate that contract and decide whether we want that president to continue for 4 more years or his successor. Now, I don't think Joe Biden will go for 2 terms. I think he'll be one of those great presidents who did serve 1 term voluntarily and passed the torch on to a new generation. But then again, he may, if he's in good health and feeling well, the consent of the government. And it looks like he may win by 7 million votes against an incumbent president. It's beyond belief, really. But it's not beyond belief when you realize that this president has continued to break the social contract. When he dispersed the crowd that was protesting First Amendment rights peacefully in Lafayette Square with tear gas, ordering this to happen. Hoover did the same thing. I was reminded in a paper this morning with the bonus marchers that came to Washington, D.C. to say, help us with this Great Depression. We need help. They did the same thing. They sent military armed people to push peaceful protests for a photo opportunity. That right there was one of the tipping points, because we believe you have the right to protest. We also believe he has the right to do his Twitter thing every day. He can say whatever he wants, whatever, okay? It can even be, well, a wall of lies, but it's his right to do it. However, you don't have the right to do this. And so when you break the social contract, we react. Why? Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Don't mix up Rousseau and Thoreau. They're easy to mix up. One's French and lived about 80 years before this guy did. But this guy was equally important. With his book, Civil Disobedience, he said, we are caught in an inescapable mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. And right now the world this is our garment of destiny. We got to get through the next 4 or 5 months. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. If there's one person in hospital that we could prevent, we need to do it. So says Henry David Thoreau. So says Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And then we get to this man here, and his name was Montesquieu. Montesquieu is probably, of all of the French thinkers, the one that was most influential in getting our Constitution written. He didn't believe in the divine right of kings. He also believed that the power of the king was too concentrated. Kings could make laws, arrest you for breaking those laws, and could be the judge and jury. Too much power. So James Madison went to school on this guy, and he read this book, The Spirit of Laws, in 1748. It was written just in time for our American Revolution, our Constitution to be written. Government should be set up so that no man need be afraid of another. Government should be set up so that no man need be afraid of another. Let's say it one more time. Government should be set up so that no man need be afraid of another. So when we have people advocating violence, that's not freedom of speech. That's not freedom of speech. Say your piece, get your side out there. But when you advocate violence, when you risk that kind of thing, it's way out of bounds. And our government should protect, like the police often do in those protests where 2 sides are arguing with each other, to keep them apart so they can each have their say, but do it in a peaceful way. That's what good government does. And to keep somebody that has a personality that wants to be a dictator, to keep them under control, you split the powers out. And we split it out in several ways: executive, legislative, and judicial. You notice that Mr. Trump's false accusations about this election have fallen on deaf ears in the courts. The courts are throwing these cases out right and left, and sometimes saying, look, if you don't have any evidence, quit wasting our time, because there is no evidence. You see, the Congress is moving forward without the leadership of the president. And even his own attorney general in the executive branch is now abandoning him. This is why you separate the powers. Imagine, right, if all of this power was invested in one person, like it was in France in 1700s. We'll come back to this slide later, but we also divide power in another way, in federalism. Now, listen, having 50 states and 50 different healthcare systems is a negative in some ways, but it's also positive in many others. In that, can you imagine if this president controlled the election process? Luckily, states do that. And when you look at the powers that are reserved to the states to establish local governments, schools, The rules, whether we're in school or not, come from our state and from our local leaders, regulate trade within the state, and conduct elections. The elections are not given to the people we're electing. The elections are separated from the people we elect. That's a huge separation of power that I've really never thought about how important that is. But we've learned at this election, haven't we? And then to provide for public safety at the local level. So when Utah gets its allocation of vaccines, people, Utah's got to decide how that's distributed. And it's a big call because there will not be enough in the first round, maybe even to get to all of our healthcare workers. Now, that may be a good thing, because if you have a few days of side effects, you can't have a third of your hospital staff out on the same day. So maybe the staggering, I don't know how that's going to work, but I do know that the CDC now, that Mr. Trump doesn't seem to, they seem to be able to talk now without interference because he's distracted. And that guidance to the states has been pretty clear. And the states now can decide what to do with it. In fact, I think I have a chart here. Here's how it's working in England. Stage 1 is healthcare workers and social care workers, people that take care of the elderly. They're going to vaccinate 80 and up first. In England, they really care about their old people. It's just a national obsession to take care of their old people, much more than here. Here, it's almost an afterthought comparatively. And I've experienced both systems, so I understand that one. And then over 65, which is my group, or with health conditions, which is about 47% of Americans, by the way, with asthma and things like that, any respiratory issues or heart things. And then the rest of the population bit by bit. Now, I would hope that schools and students get prioritized before the next fall, and that those that want a vaccine that feel safe with that will be able to take it. But this guidance now is part of this federalism plan. And that is that we cooperate and we work together, but know that the states right now have the ultimate authority. This is the most, let me put it this way. In 42 years of teaching, this is the first time when I'm thinking that people understanding federalism really matters. Elections conducted by the states, ratified, certified by the states, so that the national government, the president, can't interfere with that. And then also, because we're electing him, we're separating the election from the person being elected. And to provide for the public safety in the absence of national leadership, the states have to step up, and they are doing that. So this is kind of an important thing. Now, they have some shared responsibilities too. They both can raise taxes and that kind of thing. And then, but certain things are left to the national government, like declaration of war and that kind of thing, coining money, that thing. All right, so now Montesquieu goes on to say there are three forms of government, basically. Take all the different names you hear, autocrats, this and that, lump them into three groups. One's monarchy. Remember, monarchy was pretty much every country in Europe at the time Montesquieu wrote this. And he said they can be good, and monarchies can be good. There's good kings, right? If they work on the principle of honor. And the phrase the French use for this is noblesse oblige, which was adopted by the British. The Queen of England serves noblesse oblige. Nobility have an obligation to serve the people. And if they'll do that, monarchies are a fine form of government. The other option, though, is republic. So if you don't want monarchy, go to a republic, which is what America chose. And the way republics work is if the senators and the congressmen and the presidents and the people that we elect work with virtue. Now, this is the virtue that Rousseau defined so clearly. Rousseau defined virtue as doing good for others. In other words, you are the servants of the people. Remember this. Rousseau defines virtue as doing good for others, right? A selfless act. And so serving your country should be a selfless act, not a selfish one. And if you'll do that, you can be successful. However, the other form of government is despotism, which he lumps in dictatorships and autocrats like Russia, whatever, that deal with fear. And our leaders who are Republican, led by virtue, should lead with virtue, not with fear. Fear is what dictators and autocrats and monarchs without feeling use to keep their populations humble and in line and following their orders, like Kim Jong-un in North Korea. And I think we've seen a country that has been divided somewhat by fear in the last 4 years. And fear is nothing we should accept. To quote one of our most important presidents, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Get rid of the fear, start thinking for yourself, and get back to virtue, or get back to honor. And so honor, virtue, that's what makes good government. But you can't have a stream of lies. A virtuous person will not lie knowingly. And this wall of lies has got to stop. And thankfully, it looks like 7 million Americans have voted more to stop and end the social contract with one administration of the president and give it to another. And I believe that there are brighter days ahead, especially with this vaccine coming online, with a very capable former vice president, President Biden, who will make sure the system, we get as much vaccine as we can. We have to buy this from foreign countries mostly, and that we take care of this and maybe implement the Defense Production Act in order to produce the vaccines here in greater quantities, so much so that we can cover our whole population, and then maybe even share with poorer countries, because wouldn't it be sad if the poor countries couldn't get the vaccine because the rich countries bought it all? When we realize that if they're infected, it will still travel around. We've got to help the poor countries in order to keep the rich countries safe. We're all in it together in that inescapable network of mutuality that was described in this lecture. So with that, stay safe. Do what you're being asked to do. Socially distance, even in the halls. Wear your mask. Let's get through the next 3 or 4 months. My class, there's no final. So that's one less time you have to show up. You can do the rest of this class from home if you have to. And keep your A's and keep your grades. Okay? So y'all take care, and we'll talk to you soon. All right. We'll see you later.